All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to the C. Bailey Hub Podcast Network. I just want to start off really quick by saying thank you so much to everybody who tuned in to last week's episode, the Ultimate Classic Rock Tier List, and is helping to make that a success. I really, really appreciate it. It's truly humbling, and it just motivates me to keep going, motivates me to keep expanding this podcast network into new directions, into different directions. Last week we tackled music, and this week we are going to be diving into the world of movies. And if you can't tell by the music and movie connection behind me, can't tell now. Today we are going to be talking Star Wars. We are going to be ranking all of the Star Wars films. Now, just the Star Wars films. I am not going to get into the television world, though I have watched a few of the shows. I've seen some of The Mandalorian. I know that's the big one. I watched the Obi-Wan show. I recently watched Ahsoka, and I've enjoyed those. But that would just take way too long, at least for me. I know other people have done it, but at least for me to all of the films and all of the shows. But the Star Wars movies will always be near and dear to my heart. They'll always be right up at the top of favorite movie lists of all time. For me, I remember, seeing it as a young child, and it was the first movie that totally captured my imagination. It was the first, I guess, cinematic universe, cinematic world that I just so desperately wanted to be a part of. I remember seeing a lightsaber for the first time in A New Hope, and to this day, I think it's the coolest uh, weapon of all time, even though it's just a fantasy weapon. I remember wanting, playing in my backyard with my brother and my friends and wanting to be Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. And it was just, it really started a fascination with film that has lasted a lifetime. And it was the first fantasy series that I really just immersed myself in and learned about, learned as much as I possibly could about it. I remember just constantly asking my dad questions about the movies as a kid. And we were watching them. I remember first watching them on VHS tapes that my dad had recorded uh, off the TV. And there was commercials and we had to fast forward through them. And this was before, obviously before the prequel series and before George Lucas kind of messed them up a little bit, the original three, by adding in special effects that really just shouldn't be there. But these movies mean a whole lot to me, and it's really been interesting to just see how it's grown over the years from from A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi to the prequel series, which I saw kind of late elementary school through high school, and then obviously the sequels, the Disney produced sequels, not directed by George Lucas after George Lucas was bought out. The Star Wars universe is an interesting place, and I will say that the Star Wars community can be a fickle community. Opinions change, thoughts change. Here on YouTube, I follow a few really great creators. Star Wars Theory and The Stupendous Wave are both really great Star Wars, I guess, content pages. If that's your thing, I regularly watch their videos and enjoy them. Um, but like I said, today I'm just going to stick to the movies. There's so much I could talk about. Obviously there are the many TV shows, there are the books, toys, video games. Growing up, my uncle worked for Hasbro Toys. He was very, very high-ranking executive in Hasbro Toys, and we used to kind of get first access to some of the toys. He used to go out to Skywalker Ranch and do deals with George Lucas, and um, so my whole life I've been really close to this. And today I'm going to do my best to rank these films. Like I said last week with the classic rock bands, this is just my opinion. Um, I know that it's that people's opinions vary on these films. It can be very polarizing. People can get very up in arms about it. Um, So as always, if you don't agree with me, let me know in the comment section. I really appreciate everybody who commented on the last video. So keep it going, and I'm going to keep this going. So without further ado, once I pull this up here, let's get started. Okay. So you can see down on the bottom, I'm just going to go in the order that the whoever made this tier list did, presented these, starting with the Clone Wars movie, which is an animated movie. It came out in 2008, directed by Dave Filoni, who has had a heavy hand in the animated, not only this movie, but also the animated series, the Clone Wars series, which I really love, which I think was incredibly well done. This movie, however, not so much. I just feel like it took too large of a topic and tried to cram it into a movie. Um, I would just ignore this. I'm going to say it was really kind of a flop and a fail. And, if you're interested in this kind of thing, definitely check out the Clone Wars series. Really, really great. I would give that, I would put that in the A to superior tier, but that's not here today. So we just have that, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. All right, next up, we have Rogue One, which is one of the Star Wars stories. It came out in 2016. Was directed by Gareth Edwards, who directed a Godzilla film. More recently, directed a movie called The Creator, starring John David Washington, which is getting really good reviews and a film I want to see. And this movie took me by surprise. I really didn't know much about it going into it, other than it was the story of the rebels who stole the plans for the Death Star. But I didn't have any expectations going into it. It wasn't really a movie that I was particularly looking forward to. But like I said, I was surprised, and I was pleasantly surprised by this movie. I thought um, Felicity Jones did a great job, Diego Luna as well, Ben Mendelsohn. Um, a really good cast of actors who aren't necessarily huge names, and that was kind of how the original film was done. And I saw this movie on a flight back from California a few years back, and like I said, I think it took a a lesser told story in the Star Wars universe, and I overall thought it was very well done. And I thought particularly the last act, that last battle where where the plans they're in the final stages of stealing the plans, and obviously everybody meets their end. I thought that was done just in very dramatic and tragic fashion. And obviously you have the I guess you could call it a cameo by Darth Vader there at the end, which is really cool, and he just kind of goes into a rage and tears everything apart. But for me, I'm going to put Rogue One in the B tier. I thought it was a good film. Good film. Not necessarily great, but enjoyable and a pleasant surprise. Okay, next up, we have Solo, a Star Wars story. This came out in 2018, directed by Ron Howard. Some of Ron's favorite, obviously, Ron is a pretty famous director at this point, but some of his more notable works, Beautiful Mind, Apollo 13, The Grinch Stole Christmas, and Cinderella Man, all great films in my opinion. Um, and the film stars Alden Ehrenreich as a young Han Solo. Now, I must admit that this film was one that I was looking forward to, and that really disappointed me. Um, and I'll say the biggest thing that stands out to me when I think back on this film, I haven't watched it in a while, but the cinematography, it was so dark. I thought this was just such a dark film, and not necessarily tone wise, but just optics, the optics of it. It made it unenjoyable to watch, and also some of the sound I found was off in this film as well, and that nothing kind of irks me more than when a filmmaker, especially somebody as seasoned at this point as Ron Howard, can't get those things right. Your movie should be aesthetically pleasing. You should be able to hear it well, and those two things really stand out to me. I thought that Alden Ehrenreich as Han Solo was a bit of an odd choice. I just didn't believe him. I didn't think his acting was necessarily bad. It's just him as an actor. I didn't, when I looked at him, I didn't see a young Han Solo. There were some other good performances I thought in this movie. I thought Woody Harrelson did a good job. Amelia Clarke, I like. I'm a big Game of Thrones fan. And I thought Donald Glover was a great choice for a young Lando Calrissian. And I thought that storyline was really the highlight of the movie for me. That you do get some of the backstory of how Han Solo came into the Millennium Falcon. You do get to see the Kessel Run, and that was cool. That back, so that bit of backstory I thought was really really about it. All that did it for me in this movie. Um, Otherwise, it's I know some people like it, but it's really this one wasn't for me. I'm gonna put it in the D tier. Bit of a disappointment. I thought it could have been done better than it was. Okay, so moving right along. Now we're gonna get into the meat and potatoes, so to say, of this film series, and we're going to get to Star Wars Episode One, first of the prequels. Not the first of the films to come out, but I guess if you were to go in chronological order, this is where it all began. Now, this film came out in 1999, so like I said, I would have been probably around fourth, fifth grade at the time. Directed by George Lucas. All of these prequels were directed by George Lucas, for better and for worse. Um, and this film stars Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon Jinn, Ewan McGregor as a young Obi-Wan Kenobi, um, Natalie Portman as Padme Amidala, Queen in this film, Jake Lloyd as a young Anakin Skywalker. You had Ian McDiarmid, Senator Palpatine, as well as the Emperor. And you get introduced to Samuel Jackson as Mace Windu. Frank Oz voices Yoda, who was, I believe this is the last time Yoda is a puppet in the film. He's a much younger looking Yoda. I believe in everything else that came after that, he was CGI. So this is the last time you see Yoda as a puppet. Obviously made famous early on by Jim Henson in the original. And you also get a great performance by Ray Park as Darth Maul, our Sith Lord. Now, for me, this film, I really see it through two lenses. I see it through the lens that I did when I was a kid. And I think as a kid, I was just so excited for new Star Wars. How could you not be excited for new Star Wars? I was excited to see a young Obi-Wan. I was excited to meet new Jedi. I remember the lightsaber action in this film was so cool to me. I just seeing Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan tearing up battle droids, and they really took that to a new level. The stuff that I thought was cool that Luke was doing as a kid, they took it and they really ramped it up. And the lightsaber battle at the end of this movie, I believe it's famously called the Duel of the Fates between Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Darth Maul. That might be it's hard to say, but it's up there for me in terms of lightsaber duels in these films. And as a kid, I was able to really just focus on that excitement, focus on the action. I don't think I really understood the plot as much, and how could a 9, 10-year-old kid really understand the plot of the film? Kind of just a very politically driven, trade federation focused, not really subject matter that most kids are thinking about. And subject matter that, as I watched it as an adult, I think can really cause the film to drag and might take away from the focus of the overall story, which I feel, in this movie is obviously you see the development of Obi-Wan, but everything is driving towards, you know, their chance meeting with Anakin on Tatooine, Qui-Gon taking Anakin under his wing, just deciding that, you know, in spite of the trepidation of the Jedi Council, that he is going to go forward and train him. Anakin is the chosen one. You know, that was really the main focus of the plot, and I feel like it gets lost in some of that other stuff. People hate on Jar Jar Binks. You know, as a kid, I thought he was funny. He is a bit annoying as an adult, but I feel like he maybe gets a little too much hate um, in this movie. And you know, like I said, on the time they spend on Tatooine, the pod racer scene, that was, I thought, very well done, very cool. Uh, there were video games that I played as a kid that centered around that. I thought that was a really neat thing. Um, and you know, for me, that's the kind of stuff that I look back on fondly. I think that the introducing Anakin when they did and in the way that they did, um, you know, is a bit odd. And obviously, he has to come from somewhere. But you know, they set up a romance between a 9-year old and a teenager, with him and Padme, and I feel like that could have been done differently. But you know, it's George Lucas's creation; it's his decision. Um, and for me, the film as a whole, as a kid, it really worked. As an adult, some of it works, some of it doesn't. Obviously, some of the CGI hasn't aged well, and that's a theme that I find kind of in all of these films, all of these prequel films. The battles at the end, like I said, the Duel of the Fates is really great. Anakin, his accidental flight, I guess you could call it, that's okay. The battle on Naboo with the Gungans, that's okay. Um, but for me, this movie, I think I'm gonna put it in the B tier. Um, it's good. It's good. I think that there are things that could have been done better. I think that there are ways that the plot could have moved along better. But overall, you know, some people, the prequels are incredibly polarizing. Some people really hate them. Some people really love them. I'm kind of right down the middle. Um, you know, I recently saw Star Wars Theory do a video, and he really loves the prequels. He holds them above everything else, and I can't. I'll never get there. No hate to him, but anyway, let's move on with Attack of the Clones. And I feel like this for me, again, I saw it when I was younger, and some of the action in this movie is really cool. But for me, overall, this is a low light in the prequel series. So this came out in 2002. Again, directed by George Lucas. A lot of the stars from the first film come back. Ewan McGregor's back. Natalie Portman is back. We're introduced to Hayden Christensen as a teenage Anakin Skywalker. Um, Samuel Jackson's back. Ian McDiarmid's back. We're introduced to Count Dooku, who is played by Christopher Lee, a great actor who also did some notable work in the Lord of the Rings series. And for me, this film, uh, man, this movie, some of the worst CGI, I think, in the prequels. And the plot kind of just jumps all over the place. I feel like they were having trouble bridging the gap between, you know, meeting Anakin and then coming to the conclusion of him being tempted by the dark side, turning to the dark side, battling Obi-Wan. I feel like they had trouble bridging that. And the Clone Wars as a whole are such a big story, and so much happened. And if you watch the animated series, you know that. And the animated series does a great job, but that's, you know, dozens and dozens of episodes it took to do that, hours and hours of television it took to do that. And you've got Obi-Wan going to Kamino to meet the cloners, and we're introduced to Jango Fett. And then Anakin is tasked with guarding Padme, and they go on their adventure, and they all end up meeting and having that arena type battle, which I thought was pretty cool. Um, but speaking of Anakin and speaking of Hayden Christensen, um, you know, not only was some of the worst CGI in this film, but I feel like some of the worst acting was in this film. And I know that Hayden Christensen has gotten a lot of hate for this one. And some of it is due to George Lucas's dialogue. It's well documented that he wrote a lot of wooden dialogue and a lot of um, he isn't a I guess you could say he isn't an actor's director. That being said, I do think that Hayden got better as these went on. He certainly has done a nice job in the Obi-Wan series. I thought that he recently did a nice job in Ahsoka. But this, obviously, some of the most cringeworthy lines, cringeworthy moments. There isn't much chemistry between him and Natalie Portman. I feel like Natalie Portman really gets a raw deal in these movies too, because she was younger. She hadn't done her bigger stuff. Black Swan, she won Academy Award for, but I feel like she is above this as an actress, and I feel a bit bad for her, especially having to work with someone like Hayden Christensen. Um, there was rumor that James Franco could have played the role. I don't know how much better he would have done. Would have been interesting to see. Um, but for me, this movie, um, I don't know. I just feel like as a kid, I thought it was I was probably a preteen, I don't know, 2002, yeah, 12, 13 years old. Again, some of the action's cool. I feel like Christopher Lee does a good job as Count Dooku. I feel like the movies really underpower him. And, Christopher Lee is an older gentleman. Um, and it just doesn't do Count Dooku as much service as a villain, because in some of the Star Wars lore, he's portrayed as a much more powerful villain, and he is. Now, obviously, he does his damage. He cuts off Anakin's arm, beats up on Obi-Wan pretty good. It's also the first time we see Yoda in a lightsaber duel. I'm kind of bouncing all over the place, and you fighting Count Dooku, which was cool. But for me, this film unfortunately really falls short, and is not one, certainly not one that I go back to when I rewatch the prequels. And I'm gonna put this Attack of the Clones. Oh man, it's gonna go down in the. You know what? I'm gonna put it in the C. Yeah, it's gonna go in the C tier. There are enough redeeming qualities in it for me to put it in the C tier. I don't totally hate it. It's just not my favorite. All right. Unlike the next film, now it's not my favorite Star Wars film, but it is my favorite of the prequels, and that is Star Wars Episode 3, The Revenge of the Sith. This came out in 2005, directed again by George Lucas. Most of the same cast is back. I don't think there's really anybody new introduced in this film. And this is the climax of this story. And I think that out of the prequels, this is definitely the best done. Um, there's maturity. You see maturity in the actors. You see maturity in Anakin Skywalker and Hayden Christensen. I feel like he does a better job in this movie. I feel like he does a better job of conveying honest emotion and telling. I apologize for the dogs in the background. Telling Anakin's story. And you do really see over the course of this film, you see just the inner struggle that brought Anakin Skywalker to the point of turning to the dark side. And I thought that Ian McDiarmid as the Emperor, or the soon-to-be Emperor, really did a nice job in this movie. His subtle ways that he was able to weave in his knowledge of the dark side and conversations with Anakin, and just how he was able to play at Anakin's fear for losing Padme. I thought Ian McDiarmid did a really good job of that. Obviously, that scene where they're at the whatever it is, that opera with all those weird floating things, and he's talking about the power, to save people's lives, and for people to not die, and how he ultimately killed his master, who had figured that out. I thought that was Darth Plagueis was his name. It was taking me a minute to get there. I thought that scene was really well done. Um, I feel like Obi-Wan in this movie kind of got a bum deal. His story, while it's cool, and obviously the ending of the movie, he's featured heavily in, but I wasn't a huge fan of his mission to take out General Grievous. I thought that was a bit hokey. Um, but I thought it was cool. Others, obviously, Yoda. Yoda travels to see the Wookiees. I thought on Kashyyyk, I thought that was really neat. And then, towards the end of the film, you get the execution of Order 66, which is really, there's a lot of tragedy in this film, and you know that that scene I thought was really really well done. I thought that the I thought that George Lucas did a nice job showing that, as well as the duel between Mace Windu and the Emperor. I thought that Samuel Jackson, he's great in most everything he does, but I thought he was a good choice for Mace Windu. And just having done some more research of my own and through watching videos from some of those guys, who I mentioned before, he really was the perfect choice to face the Emperor. And I often think, what could have been if Anakin hadn't shown up and hadn't turned on him, and um, but obviously that happened, and everything leads to the dramatic conclusion. I'm sorry, on Mustafar, in the battle between Obi-Wan and Anakin, and some people list this as their favorite lightsaber duel. I really, I mean, it's large in scale. Obviously, the choreography that went into it, there's a lot to be admired, but to me, at times, it looks more like a dance than it does a battle. It's so choreographed that I just feel like it takes away from some of the emotion that I'm sure both characters must have been going through. I think they were, both actors were so focused on hitting their marks and getting their moves right that it does detract a little bit. Now, obviously, the movie ends very dramatically, with Obi-Wan getting the high ground, Anakin being too confident in his own abilities. Um, and then, I think if you've seen the movies, Um, but for me, I think the sequels as a whole come up a bit short. This movie doesn't, however. I'm gonna put uh, Revenge of the Sith in the A tier. I thought that it was a good conclusion to the prequels, even great in some regards, um, and I thought that it wrapped everything up just about as well as these movies could do. All right, so that's out of the way, and now we're gonna get into the movies that I saw as a kid, the movies that capture my imagination, in a way nothing else had before. And here is Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Came out in 1977. directed by George Lucas, starring Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker, Harrison Ford as Han Solo, Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia. You had Sir Alec Guinness playing Obi-Wan Kenobi, James Earl Jones voicing Darth Vader, and David Prowse, who was the man in the suit. You had Anthony Daniels as C-3PO, Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca, Kenny Baker as R2-D2, Peter Cushing, who was until I did a little bit of research, I didn't realize how many films he was in. He played Grand Moff Tarkin, kind of one of Vader's right-hand men. And this was the movie that started it all for me. I think that this is an excellent film, a superior film. Um, I as a kid, but even as an adult, I can't compare this film to anything else. Just the adventure. Um, I've never been able to relate more to a hero than I have Luke Skywalker. Obviously, the score, John Williams' score, which you can see behind me, which that I was so excited. I found that at a flea market in Vermont this summer. But that's the original from 1977. I'm sorry. Um, and just everything about this movie, from meeting Luke on Tatooine, being introduced to Darth Vader in the opening scenes, and just his on the just the smoke rising around his feet, and him lifting up by the throat one of his one of his officers who had disappointed him, and seeing Princess Leia, and meeting her, and R2-D2, and her getting the message off in time, just in time, and seeing C-3PO and R2-D2 on the escape pod, and it's just so many iconic images from that movie. Obviously, the in Mos Eisley, meeting Han Solo for the first time, meeting Chewbacca for the first time. It's all, it's just, I can't, when I try to summarize this film, it's just so much. And every scene I think back on, getting into the Millennium Falcon for the first time, seeing Luke training against the remote, and Obi-Wan kind of beginning his training, and Alec Guinness, I thought, just a fantastic choice, did a perfect job as Obi-Wan Kenobi. And each character's different role and journey on the Death Star, from Han and Luke being tasked with rescuing the princess, to Obi-Wan kind of very stealthily sneaking around and finally confronting Darth Vader for the last time, and Luke witnessing that, and his reaction to seeing Obi-Wan die, and becoming part of the Force, and then the conclusion of the film with with Luke destroying the Death Star and Han coming back to help him out. And then the last scene, I've always wanted Luke. Luke has that yellow jacket on. It looks like a pilot's jacket, and them receiving their medals from Princess Leia, and all of it is just an incredible piece of filmmaking. And I remember when my dad and I watched it for the first time, him telling me it was such a phenomenon that his school actually went on a field trip to see the film, and he said that he had never seen anything like that before. And he was there. I mean, he was there in 1977, and I believe him. And for me, Star Wars: A New Hope is in the S tier. It is superior. It is a near perfect work, along with the next film, The Empire Strikes Back. And I mentioned earlier that I viewed the Phantom Menace through two different lenses: the lens of a child and the lens of an adult. And I certainly view this movie the same. So just to get the details out of the way, this movie came out in 1980. It was directed by Irvin Kershner, who had done other films. He had done a Bond film, Never Say Never Again, RoboCop 2. I think this is his most notable work. But most of the same cast is back again. We're introduced to Billy D. Williams as Lando Calrissian in the Cloud City. Um, and when I was a kid, I've got to say that this movie scared me, um, because this was the first time I'd ever seen a movie or been exposed to a story where your heroes lose. It it really opened my eyes to the idea that the good guys don't always win. This is kind of this is a and it's a very dark film. The a lot of the lighting is dark, and right from the jump on Hoth, we see our characters losing. They're not It's not the triumphant tale that A New Hope was. And in fact, even when I watch this as an adult now, I know how the story goes, but especially as a kid, I remember feeling really hopeless after this one. And what's going to happen? What are they going to do? And like I said, right from the jump on Hoth, things just start going wrong. And they barely escape with their lives, and things get set in motion. But Luke finds out about Yoda, while he's nearly freezing to death, and um, he takes his he makes it off of Hoth, and he goes to Dagobah and meets Yoda. And he's I think that Yoda is one of the most beloved, one of my favorite movie characters of all time. But I think Yoda isn't at all what Luke expected. And I think that Luke struggles with that. And Luke does struggle with that, and Luke struggles through his training. He struggles with his belief in himself, and he also struggles with the dark side, uh, which is evident in his journey to the cave. He asks Yoda, is the dark side stronger? And I think that that is something that many of the great Jedi struggled with. um, and he jumps the gun and he leaves too soon. He gets a vision, obviously, of his friends dying and or suffering and dying, and they are in the Cloud City. And I Han Solo and Leia and Chewie are captured, and and Han is tortured and ultimately frozen. Um, and Luke jumps the gun against Yoda's warning and goes to rescue them, and ultimately has a battle with his father, who he finds out about, and loses, and really gets roughed up. And I think that as impressive as Luke is at times during that fight, and that is one of my, as an adult now, that's one of my favorite lightsaber duels. I obviously, this movie as a kid, I struggled with. I love it now. um I think it's in terms of cinematography, I think it's the best. I think it is the best Star Wars film, but as a kid, I certainly didn't feel that way. Um, and it was tough. It was tough seeing Luke get beat up by Vader, and I think in a lot of ways, Vader obviously knew what was up, and he knew that Luke was his son, and I think that caused him to hold back a little bit in that fight. I think that Vader probably could have killed him pretty easily, but he knew obviously that the Emperor wanted Luke, and he was, I guess, hoping that he could turn him to the dark side, which he ultimately didn't. And just I remember being shocked seeing Luke get his arm cut off, and the dramatic conclusion, flying through the air and ended up hanging out on that antenna or whatever it is. Um, the movie really bummed me out as a kid, but it it was such a masterful example of storytelling by George Lucas. And as a teacher, I've taught the journey of the hero, and the hero must face defeat, and the hero must struggle with himself, right? And this is just a beautiful example of that, and a beautiful film. And you know, Empire Strikes Back is also a superior film. And you know what? I'm going to put it up there as a number one. I think it's the best Star Wars movie ever. Um, A New Hope's pretty close, but uh, Empire Strikes Back does it for me. All right, and now we have Return of the Jedi, which was my favorite as a kid. And I think it lends itself best to kids. It's obviously it's much lighter. It's a bit campy. Um, there's more humor involved in this one. There's lovable characters like the Ewoks. And again, just to get the particulars out of the way, uh, this movie came out in 1983, directed by Richard Marquand, who I really couldn't find much from him. I directed movies like Jagged Edge, Eye of the Needle. Not super familiar with those. Um, and again, the same cast is back. We're introduced to new characters like the Ewoks on, but um, this movie I really loved as a kid, and I still love. Right from the jump, you get, our characters are kind of all over the place. Han Solo's still frozen in carbonite in Jabba the Hutt's palace. Princess Leia goes in and attempts to rescue him and is exposed and ends up as Jabba the Hutt's slave girl, I guess you could say. And then we finally catch up with Luke. And I remember just, all of my faith that was lost in The Empire Strikes Back was restored as soon as Luke jumped off that diving board, grabbed the edge, pulled himself up, does a flip, uses the Force to get his new green lightsaber from R2D2, and proceeds to, take down Jabba's minions and save the day. And that to me, that's still one of my favorite scenes in all of Star Wars. Just that battle scene. There's great action. There's a lot of comedy with Han and Lando, and Han still can't see right, and just a little higher, just a little higher, and you got Boba Fett, and where and just a really great scene, and Luke kind of rescuing Leia at the end there, kicking the blaster and blowing everything up, and them cruising off in the speeder, picking up R2D2 and 3PO with the magnets, and just really, really an awesome way to kick the movie off. And that's kind of followed up by Luke returning to see Yoda, and this was always something I wish a little more time got spent on, because Luke, while he obviously progressed greatly, wasn't really yet a full-fledged Jedi. Now we know that the final task was for him to face Vader, but I wish that he was able to spend a little more time with Yoda, because he just shows up, and Yoda obviously is very old at that point, and he tells him a few things, and then he passes on. And Luke has another scene with the Force ghost of Obi-Wan, who reveals to him that Leia is his sister, um, and then they go on uh, to journey to the moon of Endor. Some really memorable scenes there with the speeder bikes, the speeder bike chase scene. It's a lot of fun. And I feel like after that, the movie slows down and gets a little bit. I don't want to say dull, but you start to see a little more interaction with the Ewoks, and it just slows down a bit until the end when Luke gives himself up to Vader, and you have the final battle. Obviously, the new Death Star is being constructed. Lando is put in charge of leading that assault, and Luke faces Vader and the Emperor. And to me, I thought that this was for as campy as the movie could be at times, I thought that, that battle in particular between Luke and Vader and the Emperor, I thought that was handled very well. I thought, the just the tone and the emotion um, between Luke and Vader, and obviously the Emperor, tempting Luke the entire time, and you can see Luke struggling with his anger and struggling with his fear, especially when he's hiding in the shadows and Vader's talking about Leia. It really was a nice piece of acting by Mark Hamill, and I thought that you know you you saw him nearly turn at the end. I don't think enough people highlight that when he kind of lets his anger go and lets his power go, and he cuts off Vader's arm, and then he snaps back and realizes, hey, I'm on the brink here. I'm almost, he looks at Vader's arm, he thinks about his arm, and that's about as close as becoming evil as he wants to go. And I thought that was all handled really well. I thought that the battle on the within the Death Star itself was okay. Lando getting a chance to get back in the Millennium Falcon and pair up with Chewie, and then obviously Han and Leia and their mission on Endor. It was all right. But overall, I'm gonna put Return of the Jedi. I'm gonna put up in the A tier. It's not quite superior for me now as an adult. Like I said, I think it's a little campy. Um, I think that that Star Wars had become closer to what it is now at this point, and they were George Lucas and everybody involved who was making money. They were definitely thinking about selling toys, and it just had become a more commercial thing, and it's pretty evident. But still, to me, still a great movie, and one I look back on fondly. Don't necessarily rewatch it as much, but a great movie. All right, and I apologize that these are a little bit out of order down below, but now we have our sequels. Um, Definitely came out most recently, or films that came out most recently. Starting with Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Came out in 2015, directed by J.J. Abrams, who did the Star Trek films, which I thought were really well done. I did Mission Impossible 3, Cloverfield. Certainly a solid director. A good choice, I think, for someone who is jumping into, or not jumping into, but somebody who is working in this science fiction space opera genre. And we're introduced to many new characters. Daisy Ridley as Rey. You've got Adam Driver as your new villain and leader of the First Order, Kylo Ren. John Boyega is Finn, the stormtrooper turned good guy. Oscar Isaac as Poe Dameron, kind of the new, I guess you could call him the new Han Solo. And then other notable performances in here, Lupita Nyong'o. I hope I'm saying that right. I never get her name right. She voiced Maz Kanata. You've got Gwendolyn Christie, who I didn't realize for a long time. She played Brienne of Tarth in Game of Thrones. She's Captain Phasma. Um, and I thought that overall, The Force Awakens was a solid film. I thought that it was a bit gratuitous. It certainly gave Star Wars fans what they wanted. It was certainly derivative. It followed the outline of A New Hope. Almost to a T. You've got a new gang of heroes who are fighting against the First Order, which is basically the Empire. You've got a new villain, Kylo Ren, who wants to be Darth Vader, though who I think struggles quite a bit more with his resolve than Vader did in the original movies. And we come to find out he is the son of Han Solo, who we see again. It's good to see again. I thought that Harrison Ford coming back did a good job. Um, has kind of reverted to his smuggler ways, has gone off the beaten path, and that's where we meet up with him again by chance when Rey and Finn commandeer the Millennium Falcon to get off Jakku. Um, and so we see him again, but Kylo Ren is the son of Han Solo and Princess Leia. Um, and obviously, Han Solo meets his end in his interaction with Kylo Ren. Um, I think that this movie catches some flack, and I think that these sequels catch a lot of flack in general. And the next two really, I think, are more deserving of it than this one. To me, The Force Awakens was just a solid movie. I just thought it was a good movie. It wasn't anything groundbreaking. It certainly wasn't anything new, but I thought the acting performances were good. I thought the direction was good. I thought that the plot moved and was interesting enough. And some of the new characters, I thought the new characters we meet in this movie, I thought that their journeys were interesting. Um, I thought that Oscar Isaac gives in the whole series gives a really charismatic, great performance as Poe. John Boyega as Finn for me is a bit up and down, but I thought he was good in this one. And Daisy Ridley as Rey. Uh, I think that in this one does a good job, and I thought that the writers did a good job at burying the lead a little bit, especially when it came to advertising the movie. I did not expect her to be the Jedi in this, and I remember in the trailers you saw John Boyega with the lightsaber, and I kind of thought he was going to be the Jedi, but it wasn't. And even when you meet her, I didn't really expect that. And obviously, she ends up on a quest to find Luke Skywalker, which would take us into the next movie. And this movie, probably the most polarizing in the entire Star Wars film universe. That is Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. I don't like this movie. I don't like it. And I'm being quiet on purpose because this movie, it angers me. It really does. And uh, while I think that there are, in terms of cinematography, I think it's a great looking film. And this, by the way, it came out 2017, directed by Ryan Johnson, who had done films like the Knives Out series and Looper. Um, Man, this movie was tough for me, and I think really just because it took everything I loved about Star Wars as a kid. It took a character, Luke Skywalker, who was my hero growing up. And I'm getting passionate about this because he meant so much to me as a kid. I wanted to be Luke Skywalker. You know, I uh, and it ruined him. This movie ruined Luke for me. I hated what Ryan Johnson did with Luke Skywalker. I hated that they made him a bitter, old weenie of a man because that, to me, is not Luke. And I think that in spite of the events that took place, even with him failing as a master, I think that Ryan Johnson honestly had a vendetta against Star Wars, and something about him wanted to ruin it. And for me, this movie was a tough watch. It still is. I don't really care for many of the storylines. That the story with Finn and Rose, and them going to that gambling planet, meeting Benicio del Toro, and it just that was awful. And even the stuff with Poe and, him clashing with Laura Dern's character, who I thought she, for the most part, did a pretty good job. Um, I thought that, and Princess Leia, obviously, he's involved with her too. Um, I thought that that was all right. Um, you know, for me, I can't get past the time spent with Luke and Ray and just how much of a dud they make him into and how much of a disservice that is um to Luke as a character because it just doesn't line up for me. Um, so like I said, this is aesthetically a nice looking film, but I don't like much of what they did. I do think that seeing some of the relationship between Rey and Kylo Ren grow and their connection grow, and learning a little more about that, I thought that that was well done. There's certainly, some unexpected events with them teaming up to ultimately take down Snoke. And you can kind of see Kylo's struggle between the dark and the light in this movie, and how while he is trying to get Rey to join him, you can see that part of him wants to go with her because he's not totally convinced that what he's doing is ultimately what his destiny should be. So I thought that that was handled well and pretty cool, but I don't know. For me, this movie is it's a fail. It's a fail. It just tried to tear apart too much of what I love about Star Wars. And I know that that's probably not the most responsible take. I know I can maybe be a little more objective about it, but I hate this movie. Um, and that leads me to the final uh, sequel film, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, which came out in 2019. Um, and it brought back J.J. Abrams as a director. And, this movie I felt was just his attempt, Disney's attempt, everybody's attempt at major course correction. I think that there was, and there obviously still is, outrage over The Last Jedi. And maybe the damage had just been done at that point, and they were just trying so desperately. J.J. Abrams, Disney, the writers, everybody was just trying so desperately to bring everybody back, to give everybody a Star Wars film that they could feel good about again. And there was just too much put into this. I felt I don't hate this movie. Some people really think this movie sucks. I don't actually think this movie sucks. I think there are good parts about this movie, but I just feel like it was everybody trying to say, okay, like let's forget about that last one. Here's a Star Wars film that again, it's got a lot of feel good elements to it. You bring back a character like Lando, which I thought was cool. It was good to see him. It was bizarre to see the Emperor. I don't understand, and again, it's just bang, it's there. I don't understand why, how, where he came from. And I thought that was an odd choice. I still think that's an odd choice. And, they could have done, probably should have done, other than, Rey finding out that she's a Palpatine, which I think they could have done without bringing him back. I think a different villain would have been a better choice. I don't know how, um, but it was just odd having him back. Um, but I thought it was, this movie, um, it really isn't loved by a lot of Star Wars fans. I don't love it. I don't hate it. Again, I like to see Rey and Kylo Ren's journey progress. I think the scene where they're on I don't know if it's a Star Destroyer, but they're out in the ocean and they fight. And um, after Rey had she's trying to find the navigators to get to the Exegol, is it? To find the Emperor. And she sees it's very similar to that scene with Luke in the cave, and she sees, the evil version of herself, and then she's confronted with Kylo, and ultimately she's able to, you know, in the same way that Luke was able to overcome the dark in Return of the Jedi, she's able to overcome the dark. And she heals Kylo after she stabs him. And then he has the kind of odd, unexpected interaction with I don't know if you call it a Force ghost of Harrison Ford, um, but that brings him back to the good, to the light, and the two of them team up against the Emperor. People hate on that. I thought it was cool. I thought that there were some neat things they did there with him, with Ben showing up, and just the cool Force connection between Rey and Ben, and her able to transfer the lightsaber to him through the Force when he meets up with his former Knights of Ren, and takes them down with ease, and sacrifices himself at the end so that she can ultimately win out over the Emperor. And I thought it was really cool hearing the voices of all the former Jedi, you know, uh, lifting her up, and you know being her strength at the end. I thought that the movie ended on a good note. The battle against the battle where all the rebels come in at the end, a bit random, but cool. Um, Against the obviously the massive Star Destroyer fleet that the Emperor has assembled. And for me, this movie, and I'm I'm gonna give it. I'm gonna put it on the C tier. I'm gonna put it there with Attack of the Clones. Um, I would like C plus B minus. I don't hate it as much as everybody does. Um, Certainly liked it better than The Last Jedi. All right, so there is my Star Wars tier list. And again, I just want to say thank you guys so much for tuning into these videos. It really means a lot. I am trying to expand this podcast channel into a multi-interest, multi-topic channel. This is the first of what I hope to be a few movie-related episodes. I know I have one um, that I've talked about doing with my brother and my good buddy Christian Sells on 80s comedies, which I think will be a lot of fun. I want to bring in my buddy Mike Ritucci, who him and I have over the years just gone to a lot of movies together. We discuss movies together. Um, but anyway, thank you guys again. Hope you're having a great weekend, and God bless.